So I just want to go over real quick the POC. Some of you had questions. I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page. So the intent of the POC is to get you started thinking about the data model and how you're going to represent the data in your application. If you're going to, what kinds of arrays, what kind of property you're going to use to represent. Especially when you're using a third-party API, you want to make sure that you're going to be able to use that third-party API that's going to provide you with the data that you think you need, just to start make you think about those things. Also, to get you going in the implementation of controllers and services that you might need. It is not at all about working on the user interface unless you are already way ahead and already have a user interface all thought out and you're already working on it. That's great, but I don't believe most of you are just yet. Okay, each one of the classes in your UML diagram that you would have, you start thinking about being able to create instances, remove instances, update these instances. So I just wanted to. I've been using as a demo for the last couple of weeks, where you have users, right, that can create movies, right, and then they can review the movie, right? They can create reviews, and so you need to be able to create the various user interfaces to be able to manage these guys. You need an interface to be able to search the movies, right? You're going to need to be able to use the OMDB API, and I have an example of that, right? A couple of weeks ago, we implemented one using jQuery, then we re-implemented it again using AngularJS with no routing, meaning in a single page, and then we implemented yet again with AngularJS using routing, right? For the POC is enough to create just the simple AngularJS, right? We're not looking for navigation here. We're looking to see, can we hit those APIs? Can we retrieve the data? Can we render a list of those search results? Can we then fetch a single instance, right, for the details page? Yes, right. So can we do that? Does the API allow me to do that? So for the movie, since this is retrieved from an API, you're gonna have a page that allows you to do the search. When you type the search, it renders it in some summary results, right? Maybe in a tabular format or whatever format you want. If you prefer grids, that's fine. I don't really care, but that's not the point of the POC. The POC is, can I generate? Can I get the data? Is the data that I'm getting what I need, right, for building? And when you click on one of them, can you go to a details page, right, where you can maybe have image and maybe a little description, right? It could be in the same page. We did this, right? We did this in class. We did it like 3 times already, right? We did it in jQuery. Is what, I don't know, 30 minutes to create one, right? So I'm asking you, use your API, right? Exercise it, become familiar with that API, right? And make sure that it is giving you the data that you expected, right? Make sense? Right? So that's one of them. And then for each one of these, right? You also need to create a page that allows you to exercise that data model. Can I create users, right? Can I create instances of users? And we created an example a couple of weeks ago for manipulating movies, right? Where it allowed me to enter the various fields for my movie, right? The title, the director, I don't remember what else. It allowed me to add, right, the C in CRUD, and then and then it listed the movies that I created down here. So this is my read, right? My read one, read all, right? I would be able to select, right? Select one, and then it would copy it here, so I could edit it, and then I would say okay. So that's my updates. Also, each one of these has an X to be able to remove, right? And we did that a couple of weeks ago, right? So a similar page and for each one of your classes, right? I should be able to create, update, remove, right? Users, reviews, movies, right? Again, this took us, I don't know, what, 30 minutes to create one of those. So it should, and you're welcome to reuse, any and all code that is on GitHub. Okay, that is in the repositories that I have for you, my own repositories for this course, right? Please reuse that. Again, the user interface is not the point. I'm suggesting that you use a table. I think it's the easiest thing to do. But if you want to go even further and something prettier and get started on how you are actually doing this in your final project, that's fine as well. Okay. Obviously, for this to work, for the user, you'll need a view, right? You'll need a controller that goes along with this. You'll need a service that goes along with it, right? So it starts to make you think about what these things are going to look like, right? And these controllers, they're going to have event handlers, right? Where you can add, remove, edit, update the services as well, right? It's going to have all the CRUD operations in there, right? So again, it starts pushing you towards thinking of what these controls are going to look like, what these services are going to look like, right? The user interface can whatever user interface you end up using at the end, they're going to reuse these controllers. They're going to use these services, right? So it'll get you a long way of thinking about the data model and how you're representing that. For the next assignment, for the next project assignment, which is due in maybe 3 weeks, I think, you'll start thinking, okay, now that I have those services, now that I have those controllers, okay, let's start building a user interface. Okay, and you come up with a first prototype. Some of you are already there. Some of you already have some prototypes out there, so you're somewhat ahead of everybody else. But most of you are not, right? So most of you you're still, verifying whether those API using they're going to work for you. Some of you have found that they're not going to work for you, right? And you're scrambling on finding other APIs. Okay, so that's why I want you to start exercising this early now, finding those things out now, instead of pushing. Okay? All right. All right. Okay, so I put together a demo that I hope you'll be able to use in your own project. Okay, and it's now publicly available in my GitHub. So let me go to my GitHub. How am I logged in? Is that okay? Sign out. It's web dev, I think it's called. There it is, web dev. So if you come here, I created many little commits that show how to build this from scratch. Okay, and I'd like to go over this implementation instead of me coding it by hand and you watch me. Instead, I have here, starting here at this particular commit, is my very first commit working on my own project, as if I were creating my own projects, right? that I'm trying to fulfill all the requirements that are listed in the requirements document for the project. Okay. So along with you, I will be building my own project, right? And feel free to reuse this for your own purposes, repurpose it for your own project. Okay. And let me demo for you what I have so far. I'm not done. Let me log in. So it's localhost, and this is a portal, right? That there it is, client. Okay, so this is a toy. It's a sample project meant to demonstrate the various features that are expected of most of your projects. Right? Some of you are creating a couple of things that fall outside of the scope of this sample, but most of you fall under these categories. Okay, most of what you guys are doing. So here's my OMDB application. I'm following the same theme of interacting with the OMDB API, and it implements more or less the various features, right? So you have a home page, a landing page, right? Presumably this would be a very flashy home page, right? Very appealing. It offers me to register or log in. But I don't need to log in to start searching. Right? I could still use the application. I could still search for things. But if I to see the details, but it doesn't let me, for instance, add a review, or doesn't let me to rate, or doesn't let me like anything, because it doesn't know who I am, right? So if I try to do that, it kicks me out to the login page, so that I can identify myself, right, or register. If I do log in, it notice that the register away, the login page goes away, because I know now who you are. It goes to a profile page. And the profile page, I'm not done, but this would allow me to view my personal information, allow me to update my personal information. Plus, the profile page should show anything that is related to me. Anything that I ever done in this website should be reflected in my profile page, right? If I've liked the movie should be listed here. If I read that movie, should also be listed here, so that I could navigate back to that movie and maybe unlike it, right? Or edit the review that I made about that movie. So anything that is related to me should be listed here in the profile. If I'm following someone, it should be listed here. If somebody's following me, it should be listed here. So anything that is related to me should be here in the profile. I would accept that you spread it over. You provide that feature. Pages, that'd be okay, right? If you want to have dedicated pages for those, that would be okay. But the easiest thing would be to have it all in a single page. Okay. I get kicked out to the home. Notice that the home has some generic content, home, and then some data, some text. But if I log in and I identify myself, if I navigate to home, it knows who I am. So it says "Welcome, Bob." Right. So this content here could be generic if I don't know who you are, but it could be customized if I know who you are. Right. So here, if I come here, I don't know who you are, I might list random movies. Okay. But if I know who you are, then here, depending on your history, I might display maybe the latest movie that you reviewed or something. Okay. Also notice that if I refresh the page, it doesn't lose the state, so it still knows who I am. It is going back to the server to remember who you are. Right? It's using cookies to maintain a session and identify you. Okay. Also, if I log out and I try to navigate to the profile page, right, it doesn't let me go to the profile unless I log in. Okay. We'll also see how to pages from the server's point of view. What else? Okay, so let me log in. Since I've logged in, I can search my personal information, right? Because I haven't yet made a relationship with anything, with a movie or with other users or anything like that. But if I do search, and I go to Batman and I click on search, if I click on Batman, also notice that right next to the search page, search link, there's nothing right after it. But if I click on Batman Begins, notice that the details link appears. Okay, because it's a new page. Okay, it has navigated to this page. This is going out to the OMDB API and retrieving information about that movie. But it's also retrieving information about other users. So Alice also likes this movie. Okay. And I should be able to navigate to Alice. I'm not done with that piece. Right? I should be able to navigate to Alice's profile and see other things that Alice likes. Okay. Or give me a chance to like Alice, right, and follow Alice. Okay. So since I like this movie, notice in my profile I haven't liked anything yet, right? But in the details, if I like this movie and then I navigate to my profile, right, and I can navigate back to the movie by clicking on Batman Begins. It goes back to the details page, right, and retrieves the information. Some information, most of the information is retrieved. Well, not most actually. Some of the information is retrieved from the OMDB API, and some information is retrieved from my local database. Right. So this page is an aggregation of both, right, of information that is online at the API and information that I have on my local database and myself that I'm currently here, right, and Alice. You see that, right? So this list of users down below is the main way that I can discover other people. Right. So I don't want to see. Well, I mean, unless you can convince me otherwise. I don't want to see providing features where I can search for users. Right. It's a very arbitrary way of finding users that I can just search for anybody. Okay. I think Facebook allows you to do that, right? Skype allows you to do that as well.
By name, right? Like,
well, I mean, if you know the name, the person's name, maybe okay, right? If they give you exactly.
Or like people who like this.
Yeah. This is what I mean here, right? This is more natural, right? I found this movie. Presumably, I'm interested in this movie. Oh, look, this is other people who like this movie. This is I think this is a much more natural way of discovering other people because we have something in common, as opposed to randomly looking for people. Okay, I think this is I would prefer something like this, right? Although again, Twitter and Facebook and these other allow you to randomly search for anybody by name. If you know their name, and if you do that, if you allow people to search randomly, you should at least ask for permission, right? It says I'm gonna follow. Although Twitter doesn't ask for permission, does it? You can just follow a person. That's it, right? Yeah. Nevertheless, I think it's a somewhat rude. Or what about LinkedIn? LinkedIn, you have to ask for permission, right? They have to accept. They have to accept you for you, right? Yeah, you have to connect, and they say yes, okay, I want to connect with you. So yeah, so if you're going to randomly be able to search for users, then you should use some kind of mechanism that for allowing or permissions or something, or wanting to connect with you. Okay. Anyway, also notice that I'm not done with this, but this link, because I already like this movie, this should render differently, right? So it should. So most of this content is from the OMDB API. But the state of this, right, the state of this button should be from my local database, right? It says, oh, it's you, and you like this movie. I'm going to render the button in the correct state, right? And so it should allow me to unlike the movie. So if I click on it again, right, I should go back and unlike the movie. So next time I come here, this I should not be in this list. Make sense? Right? So right now it's just like, but there's other relationships that I can create here, such as reviews. So for instance, these are other people who have liked this movie. Under here, there could be another section that says reviews by other users, right? And this could be in the format where you have the review on the left-hand side and the user on the right-hand side, right? And maybe you can click on that user and again navigate to the profile of that user. Make sense? And notice that I broke it up into people that like the movie and people who have reviewed the movie, because you might have reviewed the movie but you don't like the movie, right? So they're separate. They need to be separate relationships, right? Maintaining separate collections or lists, right? Other things that you might want to put here is ratings, right? So alongside with this, there might be like a rating system where you give it, 1 star, 2 stars, 3 stars, whatnot, right? That too would need to live in our database, right? None of that could live in the remote server. Make sense? All right. So I like to demo how I got this far on implementing this. And again, you're welcome to reuse all or none of what I suggest here, but it implements most of the features that are required for most of you. Okay. All right. I'll keep working on this and just keep you updated on the latest. The only thing that this does not have is hard security, Passport.js security. And well, I'm sorry, obviously it doesn't have the database, right? We'll add the database when we come back from our break, right? And then I'll come back and we can continue the discussion on how we added that. All right? All right, so let me demo what I have so far. Okay. Any questions before I start? Okay. All right, so this was my very first commit into my project. It's a dummy index page. It's just empty body, right? I'm trying out this new way of talking about code instead of me actually typing it. I think it's a little more controlled, and you can review this starting on your own if you go in the same order of the commits. I'm just going to go from one commit to the next, and I made an effort to maintain the commits really, really small, right? So that you can see the incremental steps, right, of doing this, that, and the other, right? When you're developing in your teams, to maintain your commits as small as possible, going from one stable state of your application to the next stable state of the application. You commit, right? So you commit frequently, right? And then so that the description, the title of your commit should capture, right, the whole essence of what you did. Right, I started working on my OMDB project. It's next page. Okay. Okay. Then I added the bootstrap link. That's easy enough, right? It's just one single line of code. So most of this, half of this, we were. All right. So I'm just gonna go quickly. I'm only gonna stop and linger when I'm introducing a new concept. Right. So again, if you see me go a little fast, it's because we've talked about this already. Right? I just want to show you the good stuff. jQuery, I added jQuery. And notice that it's local, right? Only because I want to make it easier on myself as I'm developing, so the IDE can do my autocomplete. Okay. What else? Let's go to the next more. Then I added the Angular library. Again, here's Angular and Angular routing. Okay, that's easy. I moved in the index page into a client directory. Okay, remember, we're going to split this into two pieces, right? The client side and the server side, right? And I've asked you to do this for your assignment. I'm for your project. Right? Put all your client static content instead of client and the server under server. I do have an extra directory here, just because I don't just have this project. I have a whole, right. So I have it under its own dedicated OMDB directory. Yes.
I just have a question about that.
Yep.
In terms of like pointing at the index page, index should like it belongs in the client directory.
Yes.
Right? But then how do we like link to that from the like root public directory that we're doing our server?
So the public has your landing page for the website, overall website, right? And in that website you'll have links to your assignment, links to your project, and so your project now would need to link down to public project client index.html.
Right. Okay.
Right.
So it's fine to have like client / index be our like. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, and in a real environment, your index would not be of a course.
Yeah.
It would be the application, right? And because I moved the index, I had to re-update all my relative paths. I declared my Angular application. So there's app.js. I declared it OMDB app, and I added ng app to my HTML. Yep. Then I added the Bootstrap container. Right. That's just so that you know, it just adds a couple of paddings on either side and centers my content in the middle. Added the home page. Can you try keeping it down with the mouse? So here's my home page. It's just a you know, simple landing page home with a lorem ipsum paragraph. I added a link, a navigational link that allows me to navigate home in the index page. Plus, I added a config file that configures the home page, right? That allows me to navigate to home.view, and the default navigation goes home. I made my application dependent on ng-route, right? And finally, yes. So now we have the simplest hello world routing application. Yes, right. So nothing new there. You should feel comfortable with that. Then I added a search. Right, so I added an additional navigation. I added an additional routing in config.js. I added a new link that will allow me to navigate to my search page, and I have a placeholder for my search page. Right, so this allows me to test that I can navigate between home and search, home and search. Right, again, every step of the way just puts me in a stable state of the application. Breaking anything, never commit anything that breaks, right? So always test that what you have locally is stable, and then you commit. Then I move the entire header, right? My navigation links, I moved them into view/header/header view, and so now I'm including the page. That view instead of having it locally on the index page. And there's my header view. There it is. Okay, so no big deal there, right? I just made it and modularized it, right? Then I added a controller for my navigation. Navigation that I had earlier that has my two links, home and search. I said that this is the controller responsible for this view, okay? And my controller is just this controller, right? And so here's where I want to stop a little bit, right, and linger a little bit. So notice the syntax of my controller. It's just a little bit different from what we've seen before. We're adding the control like before, so that's not new. So this, I've already talked about this, right? That it's good practice to encapsulate anything that has to execute when the controller first is initialized, right? To put it in this init function, right? Just to make it explicit, right? That this has to occur when the function is called, right? When this is constructed. But more interesting is this over here, this VM equal this, and you might have seen this in John Pappas' style guide, right? That we declare a variable, a local variable that basically has a reference to the current instance of the controller. Okay, so we're going to start using this more and more instead of using scope. Notice I don't have $scope here. See that? All right. So instead of $scope, we're going to bind all our variables or all our functions or event handlers. We're going to bind them to the VM, meaning bind it to the instance of the controller, right? As opposed to binding them to the scope, right? And what this tries to do, this is just convention, right? You don't really need to do this, but it's a convention that tries to solve the scoping issue, right? The nested scoping issue that you know, you go into a page and you start seeing all these variables on a page, right? On a VM, really sure that variable, what is it bound to? Where is it getting its data from? Which controller is responsible for providing the data for that variable, right? And using this syntax here, it makes it explicit where is that variable coming from? Who's responsible for feeding the data into that variable? Okay. Basically, what we want to do is to scope the variable explicitly as opposed to implicitly. Right? So the way to do that is that we're going to scope it to the instance of the controller. Right? So all the variables are going to be bound to the instance of the controller. So the name that we chose here, VM, is based on the name of other people use model, just plain the variable model. That's also very popular. Meaning this is the data. This variable is going to hold all the data that the view is going to need to render. Okay, VM you know, like a view model, the model of the view, or just simply model. That's also a very common name. So now that the VM has an instance to the controller, the controller itself, when it's referenced from the view, okay, can all by itself, it would populate the scope, right? Everything through $scope, and any variables that you declare here inside of the scope of the controller will be visible from the controller, right? But we're going to stop doing that. We're going to stop using variables, you know, without any scoping, right? Instead, we're going to say that within the view, inside of this view, we're gonna any variables that we want to access that is provided by the controller, it's always going to be through the model, right? This variable model. So model, right? It's a reference to the instance of the navigation controller, right? So this model is the same thing as this. It's the same thing as VM. Right? So any variables that I put in here, VM dot current user or VM dot whatever, right, will be accessible through the view, in the view, using model dot current user or model dot whatever. Make sense? Now the variables in the view are going to be explicitly scoped, and you know exactly where they're coming from. Oh, it's coming from this controller, right? Right now we don't really need it, right? Our examples are fairly small and fairly simple. But when you start talking about very large applications where controllers are maybe like nested controllers and you have nested scopes, right? It becomes much more challenging when you look at a variable and you don't know where the data is coming from, right? It becomes confusing, right? So you like to be able to scope them and say, oh, it's coming from this controller, it's coming from that controller over there. Make sense? All right. All right, so yeah, so you'll see me use this syntax quite a bit from now on. Yes?
We wanted to do something like this from like the config.
Yeah, I'll do that in a second.
Oh,
Yeah, we'll do that in a minute. So this in general is referred to as the controller as syntax. Okay. If your view is a standalone view, just like this one, right, that is not inside of a ng route, right, we're not navigating, right, this view is not navigating, right, it's always there, right, the links are always there, right, it's what's below that which is being navigated from one page to the next, right? So if it's a standalone view, just like this one, then you can use the ng controller syntax, yes, like here. But if you are instead in the config file, we're going to use a separate operation, which property, which in the config file, which I'll show you in a minute. Anyway, now that we have the controller, we can bind variables to the VM, to the model. It says, so for instance, now it's being bound to the instance of the controller. There it is. I'm putting what? I'm putting a reference service so that it can be accessed from the view. So from the view, now I can access the location through the model variable. See that? Right? So this is the same as saying this dot $ location, meaning instance of controller dot location, yes? Which is exactly this model. It's the instance of the controller. And so you're retrieving model dot location right here. See that? All right, so no longer will you see variables that are just standalone variables, right? They're always going to be scoped. Make sense? All right, and I would expect that from now on in your assignments and project. Okay? All right. So anyway, I use the location to highlight home and search links, which we've done already, so that you know that, right? So I'm not going to linger there. Everybody okay with the VM and the model? Makes sense, right? Okay. I didn't like the tabs, so I changed them to pills. Right, that's why these are implemented as pills, right, instead of tabs. Let me go back. All right, so I'm going to add the login placeholder, so I can navigate to the login page. So there's the route, there is the link with the highlight, and here's my placeholder for the login page. Okay. All right. And I added a login controller. So there it is. So here's my controller down below. But to declare it in the config, right, for the login view, we declare it the same way we've declared it before. This is a controller that controls this view. But because we want to use the controller as syntax, right, because we want to scope the variables, right, we're going to use this additional property in the config file called controller as. See that? Meaning the view, from within the view, you can refer to the instance of this control model. Make sense? Right? And that's exactly what we do in the view. Also, yeah, never forget to we're creating a new instance, creating a new controller, so we need to load it. And here's a controller, right? We declare the controller. It's implemented in this function. We're using the init convention here, right? And here's the VM. There it is. And so not only data we can pass data to the view, right? We can also link event handlers, right? So we're gonna in the login view, we're gonna have a button that they can click to log in, right? So here's the event handler. There it is, declaring the event handler. And here's the implementation of the event handler. Right now, it just takes the user from the view and just echoes it to the console, right? So let's look at the page. So in the page, declares two user.username. Notice that it's no longer just user.username like we've been doing so far, right? It's model.user.username, right? And for the password, same thing, model.user.password, not just user.password. And when we call login, we say model.login, not just login. Right? Don't forget, it takes a while to get used to this, right? And oftentimes you forget to put the model, and you're clicking on this thing and it says, why is this not firing? You know, why is it not going to the controller? You probably forgot the model dot in front of it. Okay. And then we're passing the user, model.user. All right, let's keep going. All right, so now that I have the user in the controller, remember, the controller never actually updates the data, right? It only provides the data to the view. It's never responsible for manipulating the data, right? It delegates this task to the service, right? So let's look at the service. So we were going to implement the user service in user.service client, and implement the service right here, right? So the service is implemented as a factory, user service, and it declares an API. It's going to be a function that we're going to pass an object with credentials, presumably username and password, and it's going to, right now it's just going to log it and echo it to the console. Meanwhile, in the login controller, instead of just echoing, okay, first of all, we're going to inject the user service to the controller, and instead of just echoing the user to the console, we're going to delegate the to the service. The service is the one who knows about all the users, right? Not the controller. The controller doesn't know anything about the data model. So it delegates the logic to the user service. It passes an object with a username and password, and it's now waiting to do something with this find. All right. Right now, it's just invoking it, and the user service just echoing it to the console. Right. Wouldn't it be great, right? If I'd love to create a tool if somebody's interested in that. Given a commit from GitHub, right? Given a URL to a commit, that it could use the GitHub API, right? Read each commit, look at the changes, right? And the title here, and create a slideshow. Right? Create a slideshow. Using Google Slides API. So two APIs. One API reads from GitHub, right, and just iterates over a whole bunch of commits, one after another, right, and then it generates for you this dynamic Google slideshow. That'd be cool, huh? If anybody's interested, I'd love to work with you. It'd be a great teaching tool, right? I'm sure we could use that here for the posterity. Because hey, so and so built this for us. It'd be cool. Anyway, so here's user service. Okay, any questions on user service? Make sense? All right, this is nothing new. Okay, nothing new. All right, so let's see what happens on the server side. Right, on the server side, the client is going to send this user the credentials. Going to send it to the server. It says, does this person exist? Right, it's going to post the credentials to the user. Ideally, we'll be using HTTPS instead of just plain. But my free version of OpenShift doesn't support HTTPS. But if you pay for it, it's very easy to configure. And here you just have to change HTTP with HTTPS, and that's it. Right. It's very, very easy. So this is still not very safe, right? Because the password would be going on plain text, right? Anybody intercept the transmission would know what our password would be. So this would be using HTTPS. Would need to use HTTPS. Anyway, we're posting to the server. We're sending the credentials over to the server, and on the server side, you'll notice that I created a directory server And on the server for this project, right? We created app.js, right? So this is my top level server side file, right? This is what gets loaded. This is what initializes everything else, okay? On this, it instantiates. So this is a module. This is a Node.js module, which in turn loads another Node.js module, right? Which is implemented under the services directory, and it's called user service server, okay, which is implemented down here. This is the implementation of the service. Notice that it's under services, user service server. There it is, right? I'm loading it from the top level. I'm loading it, and I'm passing it app, right? So it loads this file, which is this module, and it instantiates it, and it passes the app right here. See that? And inside here is to create an endpoint, right? A server endpoint listening for incoming posts for that URL pattern. Okay? So this guy, user service server, is the, right? It's the mirror image, right, of the user service client. See that? So these two are talking to one another. This one is running, sending a post, and this one is running on the server, listening for incoming posts. You see that? All right, so these two are talking to one another, right? What it's doing, it's that it's retrieving the credentials. When we post it, when we did the post, we're sending the credentials as the payload of this post message, right? And the JSON that represents those credentials are now part of the body of the HTTP request. Yep. So from the server, we retrieve from the body, right? Right now is we're just going to echo it to the console of the server's console. Okay? And then we're going to respond an OK. Yes, we received the data, right? And I'm just echoing it to the console. For this to work, my top level server JS, right? My top level server JS, that's at the root of the the one that does everything, right? Is loading my OMDB server app.js, right? So this one loads this one, and then this one loads this one. Right, so my top level server JS loads my app.js, and my app.js loads my service, user service server JS. Yes? So my top level server, that's the one that this server, right? This server right here, it's the top level one, right? It's here. It's the top, it's the one that declares everything, right? Yes, right? Loads Express, instantiates app, does everything, right? It loads everything. And then the very last thing that it does, it loads my app.js. See that? Loads my app.js. Okay? Did I lose anybody? Everybody still with me? Yes? No? Yeah. So this is my top level service, right? This is what gets run. If I stop here, so when I run this, it runs this server.js, right? When you say node space server.js, that's this server.js, right? That in your implementation, you should have something similar, right? You load Express, right? You instantiate app, don't you? Right? In there, you also have public, right? You configure public, right? So yours should be about 5 lines long, right? So that server.js. So that server.js loads, well, a whole bunch of files, right? But it's loading this one in particular, public, project OMDB server app.js. It's a public project OMDB server app.js. Okay, so that app.js is the top level file of my project, of the server, on the server. What's it do? What's it doing? Okay, not much, but what it's doing, it's loading another module. My top level server is loading my application as a module, as a Node.js module, and my top level module, it's loading yet another module. So this is the way how in Node.js you can break up your application into smaller pieces, right? Using this require function, right? We did it up here to load my top level app.js. This is equivalent in C++ using include, right? Or in Java doing an import, right? But here is a little more powerful. Not only can I require it, right? It's basically loading this function right here. It's loading this function right here, and now that I have the function, I am calling it right away. See that? I'm calling it right away. So I'm calling this function right away, passing it app, and then in turn, you're requiring yet another module, which is implemented right here. It's this module down here, and it's passing it immediately the app right here. And what's this app? It's this one, right? It's this app. It's Express. It's an instance of Express, right? It's an instance of Express. And Express allows you to create web service endpoints. Allow you to create endpoints that allow you to listen for incoming posts, incoming puts, incoming deletes. Okay, which we did. Did we do that last week? We did deletes and puts and posts and gets, right? So same thing here, but it's a little more structured, right? It's a little more broken up into different pieces. So my service here, these are all the services. These are all the services that are going to be responsible for manipulating the data. Where? In the server. We're no longer going to be manipulating data on the client like we've been doing for the first couple of assignments. Closer and closer to where they should be, right? Where should it be? It should be in the database, right? So first we did it on the client to play around there, right? And then we're going to move it to the server, which is what we have here, right? And then finally it's going to end up in the database, right? When we come back from the break, we'll put it in the database. All right? Okay. So who's responsible for manipulating the data? It's the service. The service is responsible for manipulating the data. Okay. And here it's receiving an incoming post to look up somebody by credentials. Okay. Just returning 200, meaning okay. It didn't really tell me whether the person existed or not. All right. All right, so okay, yeah. So here's my service that I had earlier. Here's my service that I had earlier. The responsibility of the service. The responsibility of the service is to interface between the HTTP world, right, and the data world, right, and the object-oriented world, right. So the HTTP is coming from where? It's coming from the client, right? The client is sending me data through HTTP using $HTTP, yes? Right? It reaches the incoming HTTP request. Its responsibility of the service is to interface these two worlds, right? Is to be a middle tier, right? It's a facade between two worlds, right? The interface between two worlds. One world is the network world, right? Where you have streaming data that needs to be serialized, right? It needs to be parsed, right? It's basically ASCII coming through the incoming HTTP request. Right? I need to parse headers. I need to parse cookies. I need to parse the URL, right? The parameters in the URL, the query parameters, the IP address where it's coming from. The body of the HTTP request. It's a big job, right? So the service is responsible for interacting with that world and converting that into a higher level object representation, right? Express does a lot for us, providing us this REQ object, this request object representing the request. Yes, we're building on top of that framework to extract data from the body. Okay, but here's where the task responsibility of the service ends. Right. Again, the responsibility of services is to interact between the HTTP world and the object world, just like the user service on the client is also it's also an interface, right? It's an interface between the object world and the HTTP world, right? It takes the JSON objects, right, from the view, from the controllers, and then it transforms it into an HTTP request that sends it over to the server. See that? And then on the server side, you have the user service server receiving this, parsing back into an object. You see that? Right? All right, so who gets to manipulate the actual data? Who gets to manipulate the actual data? Well, certainly not the service. The service already did a lot, right? Already did way enough, right? It's interfacing with the HTTP world. Our data model should be able to manipulate the data regardless of where it's being interacted from. In this case, it's going to be interacted from HTTP, but it could be interacted even from within its own application, right? Or from anywhere. It should be the model should be agnostic to how or who is using it. It's the model, right? It's the data. It's a relationship. It's a representation. Yes, it should be agnostic on the idiosyncrasies that is being used inside of a web service. So what we're going to do is that we're going to pass the service. We're going to pass the service. We're going to pass an object that represents them. Okay. Right. And so the service knows that the model has a function called find user by credentials. Right. So the model has two things, right? It has the actual data, and it has the API. Right. That's the basics of object orientation, right? You have data and the setters and getters and affordances and the mutators, right? That allow you to manipulate that model. Yes, right. That's the basics of object orientation. So this is the interface, right? The service parses the request, extracts the data from the body. So now it has an object representation of the HTTP request, and it passes it to the model as a high-level object. Okay. Here's my model. The model is implemented in a separate module under the models directory. So under there we have user model server. And in there we have, it's a module that declares a very simple API right now. Right, it declares an API and then implements that API. Notice that I'm following, again, John Pappas's style. Right, we declare the API way at the top right away, and we do a return immediately. And then okay, so please follow this style. It makes it much more easier for everybody else to read and understand your code. Right. This way, I can just by reading the first couple of lines, I can get an idea of what this model does, right? Of what I can do with this model. Right. I'm not forced to read dozens and dozens of code implementation unless I want to, right? But you're not forcing me, right? So please follow this this style. Also, the same is true for the service. We first do the app post, and we map it to a function, and then we declare the function down below, right? So what we're going to do here on the services, we're going to put a whole bunch of posts and puts and delete and gets and whatnot at the very, very top, right? So that if I read your service, I can see immediately what the API is, right? What the URL should be, if it's a get, if it's a post, if you're expecting queries, parameters, and whatnot. The implementation is down below. So please follow this style. Everybody okay? Yes.
You have injected the model here, but how does that service know that this is particular to
Yep. In the top level app.js, right? If you remember, we had created the service earlier, right? Well, it's also going to first load the model, right? It's taking no arguments. When we come back from the break, we're going to pass it a connection to the database, right? Okay, right now we're not using the database, right? But when we come back from the break, we'll connection to a live connection to the database, and it will interact with the database. Right now, it's going to interact with just local variables, okay, arrays, okay, mock data. It's just going to play around with mock data. Anyway, so I have the model. Yep, we'll do that. Yeah, here you would load all your models, passing database connections to each one of them, right? And then you would pass it to the correct service, right? Or you might pass two models to the same service. Maybe it's a service that maintains relationships between two pieces of data, right? Like reviews, right? So I need to create a review object, right? That relates two different types of data, right? We'll do that in a minute. And now that I have the model, I pass the model to the service. Before, the service didn't take any model. See that? But now it is. And that's where the model, that's where the service gets a hold of the instance of the model. Everybody okay? Still with me? Okay. All right, mock data. Okay, so the data, we're going to use some sample data as if this were our database. Okay, right now we have 3 objects that represents 3 dummy users. I mean, I'm not saying that the users are dummy. They're sample data, right? Alice, Bob, and Charlie. Okay, and they have first names, last names, and email. I forgot to put the IDs in there. I'll have to put them in later on. So this is just a basic JSON file that lives under models. Okay, this will allow me to test my data even if I don't have a database. Right. And from within the model, I am going to, from within the model, where is it? Service, model server. I skipped loading. Did I skip something? Oh, added mock data. Okay, so here's the mock data. Oh, I'm sorry. There's a file down below. Okay, so I added the mock data. From within the model file, I load the mock data into a local variable. See that? var mock inquire. This just loads the JSON file, and now I have a local instance that references that data. I have it locally here. See that? Very easy to load just JSON data. And then and then I just when you're looking for somebody, I print both the credentials and the mock data just to test that I have the mock data in the server, that I have a hold on to it. Now I need to implement this. Right now that and I have the credentials, I can implement this function. Right? I'm just going to iterate over this array looking for a user that has that username and password, basically, right? If this were a database, it would have the same exact function, but I would be going out to a database, right? Doing a select or find by, whatever. Yes? Okay. Okay, so now I can implement the service, right? Instead of echoing, so I iterate over the mock data, looking for a user that has those credentials. If I find it, I return immediately. If not, I return null. Okay. And the service, right? Instead of just echoing 200, right? It's going to retrieve the user. It's going to use the function to retrieve the user and then stream the user back to the client. Right. So all this time, the client has been patiently waiting, right, for all this to happen. So on the client side, the service, oh, right, the service, if you remember the service, the only thing that it did was the post, right? It did the post and then immediately returned. Remember, it said return HTTP, right, post something, something, something. So it's already out asynchronously, and it returned immediately a promise, right? So it asynchronously started this, right, and it returns a promise immediately, right? So it doesn't wait. Meanwhile, on the controllers who started invoked the find user by credentials on the client service, right? On the client user service, right? And that invocation returns a promise, yes? And returns a promise, it's an object that allows me to register a function, a callback function right here. Right? Notice how different this is, right? Remember that we said last week that we were no longer going to use callbacks, right? That we were going to use promises instead, right? That it changes. I mean, it's basically the same exact thing. The same thing is happening, but the style is different, right? Instead of you passing the callback, right? And then in that function, you calling me back, right? Instead, you return to me an object that allows me to register the function. You see that? Right? It's fun. It ends up being the same thing, right? But the code, right, it's cleaner. Instead of passing the callback right here, right? Instead of passing this function here and then having the service call you back, all right? Instead, the service is returning an object that then allows you to register the object. Right, so again, same thing, right? You end up doing the same thing, but this code is cleaner, right? You don't pass the function to a service that really shouldn't know anything about callbacks, right? This would look so much uglier if I'm passing anything other than the credential, because the function name says find user by credential and callback. So the callback is kind of like an arbitrary, right, parameter that really doesn't belong there. You see that? So this style makes it much more cleaner. Also, to nest, right? If you have asynchronous calls that depend on each other, right? That one has to wait for the other to finish, right? In the old syntax of using callbacks, you end up nesting these together inside, nested, which makes it really, really hard to read and follow the logic, Whereas this one, you end up with code that is sequential, one after another, and it executes. It looks like it's executing sequentially, which is what you want, right? That's what your logic expects, that this has to happen in this particular order, right? Anyway, so yes. Receives the user. This user might be null, right? If the login didn't find the user, right? If the credentials were wrong, this is going to be null right here, right? If not, it's going to be the user that mock data. Everybody okay? All right. So okay, so now that I've logged in, I need to, on the client, I need to remember that this person has logged in, right? And we suggested in the last assignment, we suggested to store it in the root scope, okay? Now, I believe the way the assignment asks you to do this is to store it in the controller. You say controller, once you log in, right? I think it's the login controller. You say root scope dot current user equal, and then the object that came from where? From the server? Are you doing the server side yet? No, I'm sorry. The Angular login, right? Yeah. So yeah, so root scope. And also, I believe I asked you to do the same thing in the registration controller. Yes, right. The only thing I don't like about that is, other than it's using the root scope, which is bad already, is that it spreads the logic of maintaining the root scope in two places, right? In the controller for the registration page and the controller for the login page, right? So instead of doing that, I'm gonna centralize that handling of the root scope, right? I'm gonna centralize it in the user service, right? So the root scope is only gonna live in the user service, right? And I'm gonna provide setters and getters, right? To get this, to set the current user and then to get the current user. It'll still go through the root scope, right? But it'll be a centralized place. Make sense? Right? So yeah, so in the user service, I'm gonna add root scope, and I'm gonna add a set current user, which the only thing that it does is that of the user, and then it just updates the root scope for the current user. Yes? Okay. Don't worry. In a minute, we're gonna update this and eliminate the need for root scope completely. We're only going to use it on the client only for caching purposes and for convenience purposes, but we're not going to maintain session information on the root scope. Okay, only for convenience purposes here and there, but not really needed. On the login controller, we're going to check to see if a user came back because the user exists in the dummy in the mock data. Truthy, then I'm going to use a user service to remember that this is the current user, set current user. Okay, now it's centralized, right? At this higher level function. Everybody okay? Still, it's in the root scope. Now that it's in the root scope, let's add the profile page to manipulate or see the current user, right? Now you've logged in, you should be able to navigate to your profile page. Yes. So here's your profile page. What's this? Wait a minute. Oh, in the login page, if you successfully logged in, right? If you successfully set the current user, we're going to programmatically navigate you to the profile page. My profile page displaying current user, and this only works, current user works because it's in the root scope, right? What's this going to happen? First, when Angular parses this, it's going to look at this current user and say, where is it? It's in the current control. Oh, there is no controller for this view. Okay, so let me go up, right, to the parent, right? It's gonna go up until it reaches the root scope, and there it finds current user, and then it can render it. Okay. What else? Now that we have the current user, let's implement logout. Okay. So let's see. We add this link to logout. Notice that this logout only shows if there's a current user instance, right, in the root scope, right, the root scope. So this logout won't show unless somebody is logged in. Now that I have a current user, I can go back and refactor the login link. I don't want to see the login link if there's somebody already logged in, right? So if there's a current user, I'm going to hide the link. Okay. Also in the profile link, if there is a current user, I want to show the link. I show the link if there is a current user. Otherwise, I don't want to see the link. Make sense? So that's how we achieve the showing of different links depending on the state. Also notice that logout is the only one that doesn't have a hash. See that? It doesn't have a hash. All the other links have hash profile. It doesn't, because I'm not really navigating anywhere, right? There is no logout page, right? So I do navigate. I do tell the my local controller that out, right? And the controller is the navigation controller, right? The navigation controller. Here I'm declaring the event handler. and it's implemented down here. And what the event handler does is that it uses the user service, which we've injected right here. It sets the current user to null, right? And again, so the root scope current user is now null, right? So that means that this is going to propagate, right? All the links are going to flip, right? And I navigate to the home page. Although this might have been better to that I navigate to the login page, right? If you log out, maybe it's appropriate to kick you to the login page, maybe instead of the home page. I mean, that's up to you, right? What else? That's it here. Now in the profile controller, I'm going to add a profile controller. Here it is, profile controller. And I'm going to refer to that profile controller as a model in the view. Don't forget to load your controllers. And here's my boilerplate controller implementation. So I added it. What we want to be able to do is, from the profile controller, I like to be able to protect this page if there's nobody currently logged in. Right? So say somebody at some point logged in and they see that the URL is /profile, right? At some point there says they might try to type in, when they're not logged in, they might try to type the profile URL, and that should fail, right? If somebody's not logged in. So the logic to inject user service into the profile controller, and then create a function in the user service that would retrieve the current user from the root scope, right? From the root scope. And so here it is, right? I added get current user, which just basically returns current user from the root scope. And now that I have the current user, I check to see if it's null, meaning there is no current user, I'm going to kick you out to the home page, right? Or more appropriately might be the login page, maybe, right? And oh yeah, so a couple of updates here. I did rename, I think a better name for the URL. When I was doing the lookup of the person, of the user, right? The URL read API project user, and notice it's a post. Yes, it's a post API project user. And somebody might say, "What are you doing? You're creating a new user." Right, from a RESTful point of view, right? You do posts to create new content. So, so I renamed this so that it's more explicit of what I'm doing, right? I'm logging in and I'm posting because I want the credentials to be in the body and not the URL as parameters of the URL. Also, sorry, I updated also the endpoint on the server side, right? So this still works. Store current user in the session. All right. All right, so up to this point, right, we have had things in the root scope, but if somebody navigates to if somebody refreshes the page, we're back to square one, right? We're not remembering anything on the client, yes? What we want to be able to do is to remember that anyone in particular is logged in, right? And for that, we need to recruit the help from the server. The server is the only one who can help us here and remember us from one request to the next, right? So what we're going to do, is log in the find user by credentials, right? We're looking up the user by the credentials. What we're going to do there is that if we do find it, we're going to update this request.session. So that's a new object, right? A part of the request that can remember between requests, right? So let me back up a little bit. HTTP first came out, or well, still is, when HTTP is considered to be a stateless protocol, right? Meaning that that the server were designed to not be able to distinguish one request from another request, right? So that a server, the only task that it had was to map the URL to a physical file, right? Fetch that file in the local system and then just stream that file back, right? That was the entire responsibility of the server, right? That's the whole responsibility of the server. But slowly and surely, we realized that we wanted to be able to have the server do a little more than that, right? Be able to distinguish one request from another, right? Since initially HTTP is stateless, if the request comes from one browser and asks for something for one page, they'll get that page. If I get the same request from another browser, I will give them exactly the same content. There's no way, there's no mechanism for me to distinguish a request from one browser or from another browser, right? So to fix this, they introduced the notion of cookies, right? They came up with this mechanism that servers could ask browsers to store a unique identifier for them, right? Browsers now, when they came in, would be responsible for providing per server if the browsers decided to participate, that they didn't have to, they could opt out, right? They would keep track of cookies of strings per domain, per server. Right, so for this server, I have a set of cookies. For that other server, I have this other set of cookies. So that when I visit one server, I give the cookies to that server that belong to that server. Or if I go to another server, I give the cookies to another server. And the way it works is that if it's the first time that I go to a server, I don't have any cookies because I've never gone to that server. The server the cookies are communicated using headers, right? And the browser and the server knows how to parse cookies from this browser. It didn't find any, and the server with its own logic would ask the client, "Hey, client, can you store this cookie for me?" Right? And if the browser agreed, it's a browser. So next time around, when it went back to the server, it would have this cookie, right? And now the server knew who they are, right? It would keep track. It would have logic to keep track who did they give that cookie to, right? So that they could find out that, oh, it's. And now I can distinguish queries coming from different places. If you additionally logged in and provided credentials, that would be even better, right? Not only do I can distinguish, but I know who, I will tie this cookie to this particular person, right? This particular identity, right? So now I can map you maybe to something in the database, right? I can look you up and see that it's still you. And I have a conversation with you, so you have a shopping cart, and I'm having another conversation with someone else and have their own shopping carts, right? And that's how I can keep track. Now these cookies typically can be something as simple as just a unique identifier, usually referred to as a session ID. Okay, it's just a long ID number that I can use as a key, right, to map you to a particular user or particular identity. So we is this underlying framework of cookies to build higher level abstractions, right? And these abstractions are what we call sessions, right? We create an entire API, right, that on top of cookies, using the underlying cookie framework, we can create objects that follow a particular user around, right? If the user comes in, ooh, I have an object for you in memory. If somebody comes in, I have an object for you in memory, right? And this object slowly was referred to as the session object, right? Which is in this here is referred to here as request that session. That session is mapped to a unique cookie right, from the current browser, right? So the current browser provides the cookie, and I know it's you, right? And so this object allows me to store anything in there, right? It's like a hash map, one big hash map, right? I can put a key, and I can come up with whatever keys I want, and I can store anything at that key for later retrieval. Anything I put there, I can then retrieve it later on. Okay, so this is what we're doing here. Exactly what we're doing here, right? We find the user by the credentials. Now that we have the user, we store it in this key, current user, in this hash table, so that later on we can. Hey, is anybody logged in? Right? If somebody comes in with a GET request, right, and says, anybody logged in? We can answer yes or no, right? If this find by user didn't find anybody, user would be null, and we would be storing a null in here, right? Or if we found a user, then this would be an object, and we would be storing an object in the current user. So if somebody comes in and asks us, right, get API project logged in, anybody logged in? Who's logged in? We could just send back the object that we have in the session, which will be either null, nobody's logged in, right, or whatever object we stored there a couple minutes ago. Make sense? Are you still with me? All right. Sessions also have the additional benefit that they manage a timing. The data becoming stale, right? Meaning after a while, and says, okay, I no longer want to maintain this data in the session because sessions are expensive. Sessions are very expensive, right? For each unique identified user or browser request, we are initializing an instance of this object in memory, right? And then the next user that comes in from a different browser, we're going to have to instantiate another object, right? And then another one, and then another one. If you have thousands of users, right, you're asking for more and more RAM the server that you're running in, right? So it's often we say that that you have to be very careful when we're managing sessions. We often say that these are stateful applications, meaning they remember conversation, right? You say something back, and it remembers the context of our conversation, as opposed to being stateless, where I ask for something and it's like a function, right? A function is stateless, right? If I give it a parameter, it always gives me the same answer, right? But when you talk about stateful objects, the response changes over time, right? Whatever I ask, it returns different things over time. Those are expensive, having to remember things, right? So anyway, to clear out this RAM that it's keeping around for each request, I'm sorry, for each unique session ID, it clears out after 30 seconds, 30 minutes or whatever. You can configure the timeout, session timeout. Make sense? All right. All right, let's take a short break, and we'll continue talking about session when we come back. All right.
The problem with this though is that the link here is supposed to navigate the fields.
That makes no sense.
I thought it was this side. This one says-
Oh, it does. It went to the first one.
Yeah. That's what's. Yeah, I think so, right? But no, what you can do is, I want you to keep that. So, where is it? Where's it click? So I think what you can do. Yeah.
Separately, you will be able to select this particular row on anywhere on the particular row.
Fine. Fine, right? It still works. That still works. And but this, yes, you can link. Okay. So this needs to be a link.
Over here, it should navigate to that static page.
Yes. Slash.
All right. Good. Thank you.
Yes. Your account is as your administrator name will be apps. Okay, then go to the last. Okay, log in, and here you should be able to turn it on. I think I had to do the same thing. The login, using your own live. Create an account. No. Yes. Okay. For
it's built on different.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and next week.
Yeah, well, every week is
Next week is spring.
Oh. Yeah. Yeah, we discuss on Friday. So we're going to go hang out something?
Okay, so. Yeah, I'll send you.
Okay, that's yeah.
It has to use select the domain, like
Yeah, use your OpenShift domain. All right, I gotta get back to this.
I'll ask you.
Okay. All right, let's get going. All right, come on, let's go. So we have here now. All right, everybody, come on.
we have here now the currently logged in user now lives on the session, lives on the server, right? At least for the next 30 minutes. So every time there's a new communication with the server, and the session is restarted. Okay, it's a timer gets every time we send a request to the server, and if we, so the 30 minutes starts running from the last time that we have communicated with the server, right? So if we don't communicate within the last 30 minutes, this session is made void, right? And the cookie that was used to maintain, to keep track of the session, is made invalid. So if somebody tries to use the same cookie, it will not be valid. Anyway, so for this to work, for this session to work at all, to install a couple of modules, these two Angular, Node.js modules. One of them is called Cookie Parser, and the other one Express Session. And you can guess what they do. Cookie Parser is so that it can parse cookies from the header. That's just like we are using Body Parser to parse JSON from the body. We're using Cookie Parser to parse the cookies from the header. Okay. And Session is a module. It's a Node.js module that provides the high-level API built on top of cookies to maintain these objects per session, right? Differentiated by cookies. Okay, right? Once you load those two, they need to be configured, and you can see that example down here. The cookie parser just needs to be instantiated, and the session also needs to be instantiated, but you need to pass it a string. You need to pass it a string key, a private key, to sign the cookie, to make sure that, since the cookie is going to be available in public space, right? It's going to be sent over to the server, to the client. Okay, it's just a string, right? And usually it's used to identify the person, right? So to avoid that cookie being used to pose as someone else who you're not, right? To avoid that cookie from being tampered, the server signs the cookie with this string. Okay, it could be anything, right? You can hard code as a string right here. Okay, just a string. This is my secret, and that's what is going to be used to sign the cookie, so that when it comes back, it uses the same secret to decipher the cookie, make sure that it hasn't been tampered with. But since this key, this secret, you should keep it, protected, so that nobody knows what your secret is, what your string is. So for instance, since this source code is going to live in a source control, right, in a public source control GitHub, everybody could read this, right? So instead, we're using the machine is going to store the data, the secret, in an environment variable. Okay. If you're on Windows, this is regular environment variable that you can configure in your control panel, right? Control panel, environment variables. You can create environment, and then you can use it here. On a Mac, you can store it in your bash profile. And so for me, what I have is in my profile. My secret is here, right here. Wait, where is it? Oh, there it is. Passport secret. So it's this is my environment variable, and my secret is the Lord of the Rings. It's Lord of the Rings, not ring. See, but that's to thwart you, right? Right. So on OpenShift, look up setting environment variables on OpenShift. Sorry?
You use the Red Hat client.
Yeah, there's a command in RHC that you can read remote logs. You can do all sorts of things, and one of the commands is to set environment variables. I did it a while back. I don't remember. Okay, you can list all the environment variables. There it is. RHC env list. Create new ones. Library, Jenkins. Hello, how do you create ones? Oh, here we go. There we go. RHC env set the variable name and for your application name. Okay. So yeah, so look up setting environment variables in OpenShift, right? And there's plenty of documentation. All right. Let's see what else. Okay, let's keep going. All right, so those you need those 4 lines of code, right? You'll need those 4 lines of code. Load the cookie parser, load the session, and then configure those. So you need the lines. Everybody okay? Right? Or if you just want to play around with it, you don't have to put it in the environment variable, right? It's only for us to play around with the session. Okay, let's continue. So notice that I've created this new endpoint that allows clients to come to the server and ask it, is anybody logged in, right? And it's implemented this function. You just whatever's in the session in the current user key. So now, what we want to do is, if you remember, in the profile, we were user from the root scope, right? Remember that? And we were checking to see if the root scope was null. We were kicking you back to the home page or the login, I forget, right? And that's not a very good implementation. Instead, what we want to do is we had 10 different pages that we need to protect, right? Each page would have to implement similar logic, right? Look up if somebody's logged in. If they're logged in, then maybe look up their role. Depending on their role, I'll let them in or not, right? So this logic, if I spread it over several artifacts, it makes it hard to maintain. Instead, what we want to do is centralize that logic in one single place, one single maintenance place, right, where we can configure it, right, and maintain it for everybody to use. So to do that, we're going to use the resolve in the config file, right, in the config.js, where we configure the route to navigate to the profile page, right? Whenever we want to go to that profile page, first we want to check to see if somebody's logged in. Basically, that's the logic, right? If somebody's logged in, we'll let them through. If they're not logged in, we're going to kick them out, right? But we don't want that logic being in the controller where it cannot be reused. We want it outside, right? AngularJS, the routing mechanism of AngularJS allows you to configure dependencies, right? That these things have to happen before I let you in this route. This says intercept this route. It's trying to navigate to this route. Do this first. Okay, check to see if these things are true. And the name resolve is based on the fact that this mechanism works on promises, right? What we really want to do is go back to the server, see if somebody's logged in, right? And since these are asynchronous, right, we're not going to be waiting for them, right? These typically come back with a promise, right? These things are asynchronous, so we want to make sure that that promise is resolved, right? It's fulfilled, or it's rejected, right? Meaning it cannot be fulfilled. Typically, it will be fulfilled if there is somebody logged in, and it will be rejected if there's somebody not logged. If nobody's logged in, make sense? And depending on those two binary states, we're going to let them through or not. Okay? Right. So here we can list. We can create a map of many dependencies. Right now we only have one dependency. I want to check to see if they're logged in. Right. But you can create a map of a whole bunch of dependencies. Right. You can, for instance, in the admin page, we're going to have two dependencies. Not only do you need to be logged in, but you have to be in the admin role. Right. So yeah, so to protect this page, we're gonna go to check log it down here as a function, right? The function. So check logged in is gonna use the user service, and it's gonna go out to get the current user, right? But unlike before that it was going to the root scope to see the current user, instead is going to go out to the server to see if somebody's logged in. Okay, it's rewritten here. Right? If you remember, the get current user was returning just to see, if there was a current user in the root scope, right? Which is pretty lame, right? The better implementation is to, hey, go to the server and see what he says, see what the server says, and the server will return whatever is in the session current user. Right, it can either be null if nobody's logged in, or an actual object in there. Right, so this returns what? It returns the promise, doesn't it? So this promise comes back here. Right, so this returns a promise, and here's the then that receives that promise when it's resolved, when it successfully resolves. Right, and it provides in this so this is my callback, right? This is my callback that's going to be invoked when the response comes back, and the response is passed in. We're gonna bring parse out the current user from the data, and that current user could be null, or it could be an actual object, right? So here we're checking to object, meaning something other than null, empty string, 0, false, right? Anything other than something. Is it an object? If it is, then I store the current user in the root scope. But notice that this root scope is always being updated from the server. I only update it here in the root scope in the set current user. That still stores in the current user, only for convenience purposes, right? So that I'm gonna broadcast anybody who cares to know that there's a current user, right, in the root scope. Yes, right. So that my links flip, right, and make sure that, or the profile goes away or whatnot, depending on whether there's somebody logged in or. But the state is not maintained by me. It's always getting the user from the server. All right. So great. So up to that point, everybody followed me. Yes. All right, nothing new there. But this whole thing is wrapped. This whole thing is a promise wrapped inside of another promise. It's a promise within a promise. Okay. What's happening here is that this one is a function that is asking to be resolved, right? It's waiting for somebody to resolve, right, and say that yes, it's successfully resolved, or reject that promise, right? So to do that explicitly, we're going to use the Angular's promise API, which is available through the Q service, right? So $Q, that's an Angular library, Angular service, right? That allows us to create promises and manage promises, right? It allows us to create an instance of a deferred object which contains a promise, right? And then it allows us to manage that promise by either resolving the promise or rejecting the promise, right? What this says is that I'm going to create a deferred object and I'm going to return the promise in that object, right? That means that this is what I'm basically saying is that I'm creating a deferred object. This is an asynchronous call, which I'm not going to wait for. I'm not going to wait for this, right? Because it's going to take a while. So I immediately return a promise, meaning somebody is going to take this promise and is going to register a function call, right, with this promise. And this function call is going to be invoked, right? Actually, it's going to register two functions. It's going to register two functions. One for a successful call, and another function for a an unsuccessful call, right? And so whoever wants this is waiting for me to, at some point, either call one or the other function, right? And the API works as follows. If I call on the deferred object, I call the dot resolve, it'll call the successful function. If instead I call deferred reject, it'll call the error function, right? Whatever two functions it registers. I don't have control over what they do with the functions, right? I can only, on my end, notify them successful or not. Yes? You know, very much like this one, right? Very much like this then, right? This then does the same exact thing. This then allows me to register two functions. Over here, I was lazy and I only registered one. This function right here. Right? This function is the first function, first argument of the then function. You see that? It is a successful function that will be invoked if the request is successful. I didn't, but I could right here to say comma and a second function. Right? That's my reject function, right? My error function that will be invoked if the request was unsuccessful, right? If the server timed out, if the request timed out, or whatever, right? Or there was some error in the server and it throws an exception or something, right? Okay, it will invoke the error function, right? So this then is exactly what this thing is doing, but it's all behind the covers and we don't see it. We don't see any of that happening. But basically, when I explicitly resolve, then we say that this whole thing is resolved, right? You know, this got a successful resolve, right? If it gets a successful resolve, then the mechanism is to allow you to navigate to this view, okay? If instead I reject it, right, then it doesn't navigate to this view, right? But I do a couple more things. When I reject, I'll programmatically navigate you to the home page, right? I force you back to the home page. Right? So if you try to come in here, if you try to navigate to this profile, I will check the server. If the server is okay with it, that somebody's logged in, I'm going to let you go wherever you wanted to go. Where is it that you want to go? The profile? Oh, sure, keep going. Right? Right? So I can use this check logged in to protect any page. The same function, I can reuse it over and over and over for any page that I want to protect. Right? I just need to tell it, you know, for whatever route that I want to protect, I need to include this resolve. Okay, and for whatever route, it will call that dependency, check the server, blah blah blah, right? Return there is an object, there's a current user. Yes, I'll let you go wherever you want to go. Intercepts any communication, and then it lets you through or not. Right? It doesn't care where you're going. Well, it does, right? It's what triggers the interceptor, right? But then it just lets you keep going wherever you were going, right? So notice that it has no logic of where you should go if it's successful. It's wherever your initial intention was. It only has explicit logic of where to go if this is unsuccessful, right? I'll kick you to the home page. So now the profile page is appropriately protected. We're going to redo logout. If you remember logout, logout used to be set current user to null. Remember that? And then it would kick you out to the home page, right? But this is only a cached version of the real thing, right? Instead, the real logout should happen on the server side, right? because the server is the one who's maintaining a session for us of the currently logged in user session, and say, hey, there's no one, that person is no longer logged in, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to say user service. We're going to go to user service, and we're going to call a function there, log out. It's going to go out to the server and log us out, right? So this is implemented on the server side. Oh wait, on the service, sorry, in the service, we're going to add a logout, and we're going to post to this URL to the server API project logout. Okay, and what else? Do I have the server here? Yeah, on the server side, I'm going to listen in for that logout, and I'm going to destroy the session. This was a little that's a little bit too much, because here I'm destroying the session for everybody, right? What I'd like to be able to do is just destroy the session for that currently logged in user, okay? And then responding successfully, yes, I successfully destroyed the session. So that means that this session request session current user is now null. There is no current user anymore. On the client side, I'm going to cache that result. I'm going to cache that result. I'm going to set current user to null on the client side, right? So that everybody gets notified, right, that there is no current user anymore, right, on the client side. And then I navigate you to the home page, right? I kick you out to the home page or login page, whatever you decide. Make sense? Everybody okay? All right, so let's add the register view. On the register view, right, I added a route to navigate to the view page. I added a link so that if you click on it, you navigate to the register, and it only shows if there's if there is no current user. I show the register page, and my register page is just a form with a user name, a password, and a password. I made a mistake. I put password twice. And if you click on the register button, we notify the controller with the user. Okay. I create the controller. I add the controller to the register view, and a controller as model. And then load the register controller. And the controller is something simple. It's just it's a boilerplate with an event handler button, and then right now it's just echoing the user that you provided. On the view, I fixed password. I call it the second password. I call it password 2. Now the controller is gonna delegate the register. Is gonna delegate the work to the user service, right? The user for the registration, which is just gonna it's only gonna echo the user to the console, and now the controller we injected the user service. And we delegate the creation of the registration of the user to the create user in the service. Yes? And the user service in the client is going to delegate the work to the user service on the server, right? By passing data on a URL on the API. And there it is on the client side. Instead of just echoing it, it's going to pass the user. It's going to post the user to a register API on our server. So on the server side, we're going to create a URL for that incoming register URL, and we're going to retrieve the user from the body and just log it to the console and say, okay, we got the user. And the service is so it's kind of like a lot of layers, right? to these as a multi-tiered application, right? We have these very well-defined tasks, right? Each layer has a very well-defined task, right? And they try not to overlap. I extended the mock data with IDs, right? Because we don't need it now. So in the model of in the server, we added the create user API, and in the create user in the model, we get the user object, we create an ID for it, and we push the object, the new user, to the mock data, right? The mock data, which is basically an array of users, right? Ideally, we would have done some validation here. We would have first checked to see if there's a user already with that username, and then we would have rejected that user. But I'm not doing any validation, but you should. You should do validation. On the service, we're passing the user to the create user in the model. We log them in, right? We create the user object, and now that we have the user object, we log them in as making them the currently logged in user, the current user right now, and we pass back an instance of this brand new user, right? So that they can put it in the root scope on the client, right? And notify everybody that logged in. Or if I would have been doing a validation, the create user, if I check to see if a user was already existing, if I found that user, I would return a null, right? That null would be stored in the session, so there's no one logged in, and I would return it back to the client, and the client would set null to the current user, so nobody's logged in, right? And maybe we could show some error message or something, right? If that user already exists or something. Now that we have the currently logged in user, the service. Oh no, the service just posted, right? Posted the data, and then it just returned immediately, returned the promise. So the controller, was waiting patiently here. Now we're going to add the then, so we can register the function, the callback function that's going to be invoked after the registration is successful. We retrieve the current user. If it's different than null, we set it at the root scope, right? And then we navigate you to the profile. So whether you log in or you register, you always navigate it to the profile, okay? But we're guaranteed that somebody's logged in, the current user. So now, up to this point, the currently logged in user was in the root scope, right? And it was fine. It was the profile, as long as it was in the profile and I refreshed the page, right? The data is always there, right? I would not lose the information for the profile page, because navigating to the profile page always kicked in what? The check logged in, right? Check the check logged in to see if somebody was logged in, right? It went out, it retrieved the data. I now have the user. I put in the root scope, and now the profile was happy, right? So I always was logged in. But if I went to home page, if I went to the home page and I refreshed, right? I wasn't that lucky, because the home page was never going out to the server to check for anything. It was always checking just the root scope, right? And the root scope goes away when you refresh the page. Right, so as long as I stayed in the profile page, I would survive refreshes of the page. Yes, but not if I was in a different page. You understand? Right. So we want to provide the same functionality, the session management functionality, to other pages. Not all, but some of them. Right. Maybe in the about page, maybe not. In the contact us page, maybe not. But if in the home page, I want to greet you, right? I want to say, oh, welcome. I know who you are. Right, and some custom content that I want to show you that is particular to you in the home page, I need the session information. Yes. So what we could do is the currently logged in user to see if somebody's logged in, right, and do that. But we already talked about how that's a good idea, right? Because again, if you're going to have many pages that are going to need to state, right, the session information, we don't want to replicate that code everywhere where we need to state, right? Instead, we're going to use the same mechanism we used earlier to protect the profile, right? We use a dependency. We use a dependency. So here's a home page, and I want to give it the session information. If somebody's logged in, I like to greet the person. Maybe if, in the movies, I like to show the latest movies the person has reviewed or liked, maybe, right? If I don't know who you are, if you haven't logged in, I'll just show you a generic content, right? Maybe the latest movies that anyone has reviewed, maybe, right? But nothing particular to you because I don't know who you are, right? So this dynamic needs the session. So here's a dependency. Remember before, to protect the profile, we used a result called check logged in. Check logged in. So verify that someone's logged in, right? Here, I'm sorry, and that implementation protected the profile. It says if there's no one logged in, I'm going to kick you out, right? But if you are logged in, I'm going to let you through. I don't want that behavior in the home page. I want you to be able to see the home page regardless of whether you're logged in or not, right? But I want some logic to show you a couple of things here or there, depending on whether you're logged in. That logic of showing you one thing or the other, I'm going to leave that to the view. The view and the controller should decide what to show. But the fact of determining who's logged in should be centralized in one single place, right? So there it is. So I'm gonna provide both the search page and the home page. Both want session information, right? The search page maybe wants user information because say they search something, Star Wars, and I like Star Wars, right? It might be that next time I search, maybe it wants to remember the fact that I liked Star Wars before, and it highlights all those movies that I liked before. See that? Right, so I want people to use the search page. If I don't know who you are, I won't highlight anything because I don't know who you are. I don't have any information about you. But if I know who you are, I can decorate the content in some way that is particular to you. Make sense? In the home page, again, I explained. So both the search page and the home page are going to go currently logged in user. Notice it has the same exact resolve. So that's great. Here's an example where we were using the same code of getting a hold of who's logged in, right? And so the implementation is right here. So get logged in uses the same promise mechanism we talked earlier, and it uses the user service, the same implementation we had earlier. Get current user, but this time around we're not gonna stop you if the current user is null. On whether it's successful or not, we're going to resolve whether the current user is null or not, right? We're going to resolve all the time. We're never going to reject you going to the home page, right? But if this comes back null, then the root scope will be null. But if the current user is not null, whatever the current user is, right? I'm going to set that to the root scope, right? So the home page will know what to do whether one is logged in or not. Make sense? Okay. All right. So up to this point has been just user management. All right. I haven't done anything with actual movies. Okay. Up to this point has been all registering, logging in, and sending you here or there. Okay. Finally, let's do something with searching for movies. Okay. So here's my search page, and I just have a simple input field and a button that notifies the controller, the search controller, that I'm searching for this. And a lot of this we've done already, so I'm going to go a little fast here. Just going to search the title, going to pass the movie. In the controller, newer. added the search controller. So here's the search controller with the model. Loaded the search controller. Here's the boilerplate implementation of the controller and the event handler for searching the movie. Right now it's just spitting out in the console. Then I'm going to create a service. So all communication with the OMDB service, we're going to encapsulate that in a reusable model, in a reusable module, right, that will allow us to talk to that service. I'm going to put it under services, OMDB service client. And here's my boilerplate service, right, OMDB service. And right now it has an API, a very simple API for searching a movie by title, right? Which right now the only thing it's just echoing that title to the console. On the controller, in the controller, the search controller, instead of just echoing the movie to the console, we said we're going to delegate the search to the service, right? Remember, controllers actually do the work, right? They know who they don't do the work, but they know who does the work, right? They delegate the work to the services, right? Who are actually responsible for fetching the data from wherever, right? Notice that the user service is communicating with our own server, our own Node.js server, whereas this OMDB service is going to be talking to the OMDB service. See that? One of the servers we own, the other one we don't, right? But the communication is the same using HTTP, right? Okay, so OMDB added OMDB service controller receives. Wait, did we do this? Okay, so here's the service. So the OMDB service to use the HTTP service to communicate, to send the title to the OMDB service. And we did this already, right? We did this a while back, and it's going to return the promise that the controller is waiting for. The controller receives the promise, and here's the response, and the movie is embedded in the response. Although there's a couple things in there, right? There's the how many matches, the first 10 matches, right, is in there, and so I pass it to the rendering, right? So the client renders it, excuse me, using first it was just the button, right? Now we have meaning we're going to have the search at the top, and if the search is successful, we're going to show the search results down below. You might decide that it's in a separate page. That's okay, right? Or it could stay in the same page, or this search could be on the home page, right? It could be in the home page, and then you navigate to search results. It's up to you, whatever you want. There has to be a way of searching, have to way of something showing the results. Here I'm showing all in the same page. So if there is model data, that's the data coming from the controller. If there is model data, then this is rendered. Notice that I'm using ngIf as opposed to ngShow. Okay. They're a little bit different. ngShow hides and shows the content based on the expression, but the content is nevertheless in the DOM. Right? It is part of the DOM, and then it uses classes, styles to hide it or show it, display none or display block. Okay. Whereas ngIf is different in that the content is not even in the DOM. Right? This content, this whole div, is not injected into the DOM unless the expression is truthy. Okay, and so this doesn't overburden the DOM, which is a little better, right? If this were ngShow, this entire div would be in the DOM, but it would be hidden. See the difference? Right, so this is added to the DOM if this is truthy. Okay. All right. Anyway, so we have the data, and if you remember, the array was in the search attribute in the data. We're going to iterate over it. We use the poster for the image. Here's the title and the weeks ago, so I'm not going to linger there. Here's the details view. So the details view, what we want to be able to do is, if you click on a particular movie, we like to navigate to a details page that allows us to see more information about it, reviews, likes, and whatnot, other users. So here's a details view, and the route, in the route, we have, notice the IMDb encoded in that URL, right? So the controller is going to have to retrieve that IMDb from the URL and then retrieve the details for that particular movie. And again, this is very similar to what we did. Here's the details. I moved the search link down below. Here it is. And notice that I added a link for the details. I added a link of the details, but the details logic of showing it or not is a little more involved. Whereas in the one is checking to see if a URL is exactly equal to profile. This one instead says that I will show it if details is in the URL, somewhere in the URL. Right? The reason is that the URL has more stuff, right? Has details and then the ID of the movie, right? So I can't, I'm not going to pattern match against that. So I say if somewhere in the URL you have /details, then I want to show the details link. Same thing for the active. If you have details in your URL, then I want to show it active. Okay. In the view, in the search view, the title of the movie. The title of the movie, I'm going to make it into a hyperlink, right? So that if you click on the title of the movie, I want to navigate to the details page and pass of the movie. What else? I think that's it. So in the details view, we're going to have a controller that is going to want to parse that IMDb from the parameter. Right now this is the boilerplate for the controller, right? Doesn't really do anything. We load the details controller, making sure that we load it. But what we want to do is we want to retrieve the IMDb from the route params, right? From the parameter. There it is, route params. We parse it from the URL, and right now we're just logging it to the console. And what we want to do is use that IMDb to retrieve the details for that movie, and we're gonna put that in our OMDB service. Any interaction with the OMDB should go through this service. So we add a find movie by IMDb. There it is, and it's gonna return. It's gonna send a get with the IMDb appended, and it's gonna return the promise to the controller. The controller is going to use find IMDb. It's going to receive the promise, and it's going to log the console, the response. Okay. The details page is going to receive. We're going to send the data to the details page for rendering. The details view is going to take an H3 out of the title. Is gonna load an image from the poster. Is gonna list the plot. Is gonna list the actors. Very much like what we did a couple weeks ago. Okay, so the favorite button is a little more different, right? We need to update data about who likes what, right, to the server. We need to remember these things, right? So here we have the we're going to add on the details controller. We're going to add an event handler on the favorite button, right? If you click on the favorite button, the controller is going to be notified, and it's going to know the ID of the movie that you liked. right? In the details view, we add the button. There it is. We notify the controller, and I'm using the star as a glyphicon. This should be a little more involved, right? This star should show highlighted or not highlighted, depending on whether it's liked or not liked by the current user who's looking at this, right? Right. So this could be a little more involved right now, right? Right now it's just an empty star, and we display the plot. So the event handler. Okay, so the details view should also know who's the currently logged in user, right? The details view, because for instance, that button should be highlighted or not depending on the user. Also, I like to know who's logged in because I might want to show the reviews for this movie, right? Or on the current user. The details controller is going to use the root scope. I guess I could have used the user service to get the current user, right? I could have used user service .get current user. And the location here, here I am making sure that I have both the username of the current user and I have the IMDb. You know, and once I have this, I'm going to be able to notify our service, telling you, hey, this particular user likes that particular movie, right? We need to create a relationship between the two, okay? And okay, so if you try to favorite something, but there is no current user, right? I'm going to kick you out and send you to the login page, okay? All right, so on the client side, this service is I'm going to create a service that specifically manages movies, right? Now I believe we covered this earlier, but let me talk about it, right? We did talk about the data model and the use cases driving a little bit what, you know, how we want to represent this data, right? Let me go here and stop sharing. Right. So the use cases that we want to implement is that as I like, if I say that I like a movie, right? I like to be able to do two things, right? In my profile page, I like to show the list of movies that I like, right? And this list is specific to me, the current user that's logged in, right? So if you have here the profile for user 1, right? They'll have maybe movie 1 and movie 2, right? If instead you're in a different profile, user 2, you might show different movies, right? Maybe movie 2 and movie 3, right? But if I am in the movie page, I go to the movie 1 here, right? It should list all the users that like this movie. See that? So it would definitely list user 1. If instead I am in movie 2, right? I have like this movie, so I would be listing user 1 and user 2. And then for movie 3, I would have just user 2. Make sense? So this is a use case. Because of this use case, it forces us to capture the data in a particular way, right? It forces us to capture the user in one collection and the movie in a separate collection, right? And we need to maintain some relationship that will allow us to navigate both ways, right? From the user 2, right? I have, what was it? I erased it.
So I have two users here. You have three, user 1, user 2, and user 3, right? Or was it just two users? Just two users, right? And you have three movies, right? M1, M2, and M3, right? So if I'm user 1, I believe I like movie 1 and movie 2, right? And if I'm user 2, I like movie 2 and movie 3. So somehow we need to maintain this somehow, right? The classical way to maintain this is to have a mapping table in between here, where it says user to movies that relates these two, right? And so this has foreign keys to here and foreign keys to over there. So this is one to many and one to many, right? And the relationship here is that you have user 1 likes movie 1, user 1 likes movie 2, user 2 likes movie 2, and user 2 likes movie 3, and that's it, right? Right. So this mapping table, right, allows us to answer the question: if I have user 1, which movie should I show? Oh, that's movie 1 and movie 2. If I have instead user 2, which movie should I show? I should show movie 2 and movie 3, right? But it allows us to look at it from the other way, right? From the right, from this side. If I have movie 1, which user should I show? I should be able to show just movie 1, only user 1. But if I'm in movie 2, I should show user 1 and user 2, right? So I should be able to see this both ways, and the URL should allow me to reflect this, right? When I'm in this page, I should be able to query, given this movie, give me the users. Whereas if I'm here, given this user, give me the movies, right? So this URL, to capture this from looking at it from the user point of view, would be something like, API user, right? User 2, right? And then I want the movies, and this returns to me given user 2. Then it would be movie 2 and movie 3. There's two movies, right? But if I'm standing on the other side, right, I like to be able to say, API movie, right, slash movie 2 users. See that? Right? And this URL allows me to say, okay, well, starting here, if I tell you M2, movie 2, this will come back with an array of 2 users, user 1 or user 2. That makes sense? Right? Okay, so this is the classical way of implementing, right? I'm sorry, these are the URLs we're going to use, right, to be able to navigate the data structure from both ways. So we're going to keep this, but this implementation in a relational model, this is doing it, okay? But in an object-oriented non-SQL world, you can implement it in a couple of ways, right? You can certainly go this way, right? It'll probably be the easiest thing you could do, right? The thing is that this one, in any case, in a relational model, you use joins, right, to be able to retrieve all this information and reconstitute those arrays, right? Arrays of movies or arrays of users. In a NoSQL database, there are no joins, right? You have to use MapReduce or iterate somehow on the server to reconstitute the data. Right? These arrays, you need to build them yourselves, right? But you have to retrieve this. So you can go this way. The way you can represent it is this way, and or another way, an alternative way. An alternative way is that part of the data here, where you're representing your users, okay, you can add arrays, right? Where you can say that user 1 likes movie 1, user 2 likes movie 1 and movie 2. What was that? Was that what we said earlier? I forget. Is that what we said? Yeah, something like that, right? And on the other side, you can say something similar. Who likes movie 1? Oh, user 1 likes likes movie 1 and who likes movie 2? Oh, user 1 and user 2. Right? This is an alternative way of implementation, right? Because in a non-SQL database like we have here, the objects that are being stored in the database are actual JSON objects, right? JSON objects that can contain arrays, right? That can contain other objects, nested objects, right? You know, full-blown instances, right? As opposed to just something flat that then needs foreign keys and primary keys to generate hierarchies, right? In a SQL database, the only way that you can create hierarchies is to have foreign keys, right? Children to parents, parents to their parents, parents to their parents, foreign keys, foreign keys, foreign keys, right? You can't embed objects. Well, I mean, you can have blobs, but it's not the same. In a MongoDB database, we'll see when we come back, you can embed entire JSON objects in there, right? And those JSON objects can contain other JSON objects, arrays and whatnot, right? So we're gonna explore this mechanism, right? Because the other one is, you know, everybody understands that one. Everybody knows that one. Implementation, right? Okay, everybody okay? All right. All right, so let's keep going. Okay, so here it is. The controller had the username, the user ID, and the IMDb. It's going to delegate that to the movie service. So here we have we had a user service, right? We had a user service. And the user service allowed us to create users, find users, log in, register users. Now we're liking a movie. Where do we store that? This particular user likes this particular movie. Well, we need to store it in 2 places, right? We need to store it, the movie, we need to tell it who likes it, and we need to update the user and say, this user likes that movie. So we have to create this two-way relationship between the two. Okay, so first let's start with the movie, and the movie going to say, hey, this user likes you, right? Here's the user, and here's the ID of the user, and here's the IMDb of the user. And on the details controller, okay, is going to pass along the ID of the user. The ID of the user and the IMDb, the ID of the movie, okay, to the user service. And the user service is going to pass it along to the server. So on the server side, you know, here's us passing the fact that this user likes this movie, okay? And on the server, we're going to be listening in. Oh, okay. So remember, we had 2 models before, right? We had we had 1 model and 1 service before, right? It was a user model and it was a user service, yes? But now we're going to have 1 additional service, right? We're going to have the movie service now. We have the user service that handles all the HTTP communication for users. Well, we need to, for each entity that we're manipulating, the user entities that we're going to be storing in the database and the movie entity that we're going to also storing in the database, they all have to have their own dedicated, okay? Very much like we're doing in the client. The client, if we're talking about OMDB, we have a service. If we're talking about movies, we're going to have a movie service. If we're going to have talking about users, we're going to have a user service. Each service is responsible for the manipulating the data for that particular entity. So I renamed model and service, and on the server, I renamed it to user model and user service to distinguish them from the brand new movie service. Okay? Remember, the user model is responsible for the CRUD operations of users. And the user service is responsible for all the posts and the puts and the gets for accessing that data. Yes? And the movie service is now going to be responsible for all the puts and the posts and the gets for a movie, right? And shortly we're going to create a movie model, just like we have a user model. Okay, so here's the movie service. The movie service is now receiving, given this user, and this movie, and I want to store the fact that they like this user likes this movie, right? And right now I'm retrieving the user ID and the IMDb, and just displaying it in the console. Okay, everybody okay? Right. Here's a movie model. Now the service is going to delegate to the model. So here's the movie service. Here's the brand new movie model, right? It's implemented under models, movie model. And the service, I'm going to so that it can manipulate the data of the model of the movies. In the model server, here it is. We have just one of the CRUD operations. Just find the movie by IMDb. Okay, this would be in our database, right? We have movies in our database. And the implementation is very easy. I'm just going to iterate. I'm going to store it locally in an array of movies, but in realistic, this would be in a database, right? But for now, array will do. I'm going to iterate over the movies, looking for the ID IMDb. When I find it, I return movie. Okay. On the service, instead of just echoing the user ID and IMDb, I actually use the model to look up the ID, the movie by IMDb. Now I have the movie, right? So now I have the ID of the user, the ID of the movie, and now I have a movie object. Okay. Again, baby steps. Okay, so now how do I store the fact that a movie is liked by a user and a user likes a movie, right? I need to update both, right? On the service side, I have the movie now, right? I check to see if the movie is not null, right? If the movie is not null, also check to see does it have any likes, right? If it doesn't have any likes, I'm going to update it to an empty array, and I'm going to push the ID of the user. So now the movie knows that this particular user likes that movie. Okay, I'm going to extend the model so that I have my first read by ID, right? I'm going to do a create movie, because what I want to do is create an instance of a movie that maintains some data, right? It caches some data, right? Right now, the only thing I'm going to cache is the IMDb, but really what I want to cache there is also like the title of the movie that I like to cache in there, right? I also like to cache the poster URL. That's going to be useful when I am on the profile page. When I'm on the profile page and I want to list all the movies that I like, right? I want to show, thumbnails and the title, thumbnail and title, thumbnail and title, right? Where do I get this information? Well, the IMDb should be enough, right? The IMDb should be enough. That with the IMDb, I could go and fetch the images, right, from the OMDB service. I could also fetch the titles, but that would be very, very expensive, right? Because if I like 20 movies, it would be 20 unique queries to the IMDb, to the OMDB API, right? Retrieving the just for the title and from the thumbnail, right? So to save me that trip of asking 20 times for this, very small information, I'm going to cache it on my local database. Yes, right? So right now I'm only caching the IMDb. Later on, we're going to add poster and title. Okay. Right now it's just the IMDb. So creating a movie, if you give me the IMDb, right now it's very flat. I'm receiving the IMDb. Later on, we're going to extend it to be an entire movie object, okay, instead of just the IMDb. But for now, that's fine. I'm going to push it to a local array.
And so on the model, right, when in the like, when I was liking it, I'm gonna refactor this so that instead of just creating an array of likes, I'm gonna have a full-blown create me a movie, right? Create me. So if there is no movie, if you didn't find any movie, right, create me an entire movie, and then in there put the likes in there, and then push the user ID in there, right? So a full-blown object. I was only dealing with the IMDb's strings. Instead, I want an entire object. Remove user ID from, what's this? Remove from, oh yeah, the find movie by IMDb. I didn't need user ID. I had it there earlier. I didn't need it. Added find user by ID. Yeah, because I found the movie. Now I have the movie, and I told the movie who likes it. Now I have to find the user and tell it that it likes the movie, right? Because I'm storing it in two places, right? I'm telling the user who like, and I'm telling the movie what users like it, right? Because again, I need to have both represent both ways, right? So the movie service, I am passing the user model to the user's models. One is the movie model, telling it the users that like it, and also it's going to manipulate the user model, telling users what movies they like. Okay. So in the server, in the user model server, I add a finder to retrieve the user by ID, and this iterates over the mock data for the users looking for the ID with that ID. And once I have the ID, movie in the movie service, right? So I already pushed the user into the movie, right? So the movie already knows that this particular user likes it, yes. But now I'm gonna update find the user by the ID. If it doesn't have a like, I add likes, and then I push the IMDb into the user. So now they both know who they like. Right, the user knows that they like this movie, and the movie. Okay, so on the client side, I didn't like the fact that I was passing just a flat IMDb string, right? Instead, what I like to do is pass an entire movie object. This is the movie that they like. Right, because I don't want to just store the IMDb. I also want to store the title. I want to store the URL to the image, right? So that I can do this summary here, right, in the profile. Yes. So I want to cache that on the server side. So now I'm passing user ID, the movie, instead of the flat IMDb. It's now part of an object. And now I'm passing the movie object itself, which includes everything, right? The plot, the URL, the title, a whole bunch of things. I don't need everything. I'm only going to cache the URL to the image and the IMDb and the title. So on the server side, controller, when I favorite something, I pass the entire movie object to the service. I update the view so that when I favorite something, I'm not passing just the IMDb, I'm passing the entire object. On the server side, when I create a movie, I don't just pass in the IMDb, I pass the entire movie object, and I copy in the movie instance, I copy the IMDb, right, the poster, and I copy the title. When I create a new instance of an object of a movie, right? And on the service, right? On the service, the movie is coming from the request, right? It's being posted to us. I retrieve it from the body and I pass it to the service
to the model as the movie OMDB. Okay. Oh, this was a quick fix. This was bothering me. They had a function called find user by credentials. It was really just log in, right? I think it's a better name for the function. So I renamed it to login. Everywhere else, I had used nice, names like logged in, log out, register. I think it was time for me to fix this to be login. OMDB API. So from the user service client, what's this? Oh, yes. I did a couple of fixes here. Because I have so many projects, I want to make sure that my URLs match those projects. So I added to all the URLs OMDB. So I fixed the client side. I fixed the server side. I added OMDB. All right. So what I want to do now is that now that I have the movie knowing who likes it and the users knowing what movies they like, on the profile page, I like to render all the movies that a particular user likes. If I go into my profile page, I would like to see all the movies that I've liked, or the movies that I've rated. Right? They should be listed in my profile. Right? So I'm adding a get profile to the user service, and implement it right here, right? That it's taking the current user ID, right? So it's using the current user ID. Again, I could have used the user service for that, right? Oh wait, I am in the user service. I guess I could retrieve from my own API, right? In the controller, notice that in the profile controller, I wasn't really doing anything, right? I wasn't doing anything. So I'm gonna improve it so that when the profile controller gets loaded, the first thing it's going to do is going to go to the server to retrieve the profile information, right? On the server side, on the client, we're gonna send the request for the profile. There it is, the profile. We're gonna pass the ID of the user, of the currently logged in user. On the server side, we're gonna get the user ID, right? Parse it from the path parameter, and then we're gonna use that ID to retrieve the user profile. So on the server, now that I have the ID of the user service, I'm going to, from the model, right? From the model, I want to retrieve that user. Now I have that user, the user object. Wait a minute. Retrieve the user profile. Log. Okay, so we're not sending it back yet. We're not streaming it back just yet. Okay. I moved a couple things around here so that it's user model. Okay, I declared first the two models and then the two services. That's because both services need both models. Okay, so I moved it around a little bit, and on the service, I was first just receiving one model, which was the user model, but now I'm receiving both models, the movie model and the user model, to implement the profile, I need to retrieve both things. I need to retrieve the okay, I'm retrieving the user model. There it is. Okay, I renamed everything. Where I had model, now it's user model. Just making sure I have everything okay. There. In the movie model. Okay, so in the movie model, what I like to be able to do is, so say I have this user, right? And the user has in the likes array, has a list of all the movies they like, right? So I need to join these two things, right? If this were a relational database, I would be doing a join on these are all the foreign keys for the movies that this person likes. Retrieve all those movies with a join, right? But I don't have that here. So what I'm going to do is that giving a user, I have the likes inside of the user, right? All the movies array. So I'm going to pass that array to find movies, plural, but by IMDb's. So I am passing as a parameter an array of IMDb's, right? So what I'm going to do is going to iterate over the array of all the movies, searching for all the movies that have this ID, right? So for each one of the IDs, I find the movie by IMDb earlier, and then I just create an array list, right? An array of all the movies that I find for all those IDs. Okay. Then in the user service, once I have the user for the profile, I retrieve all the movies and I add it as a property of the user, and I return the entire user. Now the user object has a new property that is an array of all the movies that this person likes, and these movies are now objects, right? These are objects that have the title in there. It has a poster, right? It has the IMDb, right? And now that I have that on the client side, right? I was retrieving the profile. I send that data, that user that now contains the embedded movie objects. I send it to the view, and the view now is going to render. Right, it's going to render for each movie in the likes movie. It's going to iterate. It's going to ng repeat for each movie in there. It's going to create a panel, right? And you're going to put the poster in an image, and it's going to put the title in the heading of the panel, right? And that's how it shows a panel of all the movies that I like. You see that? All right, I'm going to leave it here. I'm losing my voice. So I tag this in my GitHub. So if you go to GitHub Janunzi web dev, and you go to public, and you go into project, okay, it's all in here. All right, feel free to grab from here and reuse as much as you want for your own project, right? You can use this as a starting point, and then you can customize it for your own purposes. Okay. All right. All right. So I'll say if anyone wants to chat, I'll use this as office hours, right? If you have any questions. All right. All right. Thank you.